It is said that when Cain, the third mortal and son of Adam and Eve, slew his brother in wrath and jealousy and misguided love, the world changed. For the first time, a creature had killed, not out of necessity, but out of passion, and it set in motion a change amongst both humans and the fallen. The Ebon Legion, Abaddon's chosen, marched on Sagan, the border settlement between the host of heavens and the legions of Lucifer's territory, and captured or slaughtered all humans loyal to heaven they could find. Mortals were killed in the most gruesome of ways, torn apart limb by limb, and left either dead or to die, their wails of pain and suffering echoing across the lands. The host of heaven was stunned. Where the angels of Lucifer had been set free by the first murder, had been given permission to do as they wished, the servants of the Creator knew not what to do. The archangels were absent, sent away to attend a duty given to them by their Maker, and thus Jabniel, subordinate of Anahel, approached the Ebon Legion. He threatened them with reprisal for the slaughters they had committed, and in turn he was cleft in twain by Liriel, Jabniel's former superior, and of the Devourers. Liriel's axe bit deep into Jabniel and destroyed him utterly. He ceased to exist, and he was the first true casualty of the war. It was an event that would spark the time of atrocities. Sagon was brought to ruin, pillaged and burned, and only a third of its defenders managed to escape the wrath of Abaddon's legion and flee to the other high cities of the host. Yet they would find both Zebul and Makonnen under siege. Makonnen survived, but Zebul's great library was burned to the ground, and with it many ancient tomes and ledgers, including the Book of Names, and Abaddon's own writings, the Book of Abaddon, which detailed all the flaws in creation that he had noticed while still serving as an angel of heaven. When the dust settled, Lucifer and the other legions arrived, and the Morning Star admonished Abaddon for the cruelties he and his legion had done. The Ebon Legion, confused, felt shame in this, but Lucifer's Archduke, for the first time, spoke up against their leader. "We no longer need to endure the host's presence upon this realm," he said in return. "God has heaven. Is he not content to leave earth to us? If need be, we will hunt down all his servants and cast them into nothingness." Lucifer was not pleased by this answer, but his retort was spoken down by both Asmodeus and Azrael, who argued that it was humanity who had invited this evil into the world. Humanity, for whom these angels had given up their duties in heaven for. They argued that it was mankind's own actions who had doomed them all, and thus why should they devote themselves to these creatures of dust? Angered and saddened by these words spoken by 3 of his 5 closest generals and friends, Lucifer fell into despair. He tried desperately to convince them that their path was that of hate and blindness, but they would not listen. They did not abandon him as their leader, but that day the 5 legions were shattered, and each archduke proceeded to do things as they thought best. The love the angels had felt for the children of Adam and Eve would come to grow twisted and wicked over time. While many of them still loved their charges, it was a dark, twisted love, where the fallen would constantly invent new and creative ways to reap the faith of the humans. They would in turns torture them and smother them with gifts. They would force them to construct monuments for their greatness, and they would reshape entire mountains to please the eyes of but one of their mortal charges. The Ebon Legion's march against the forces of heaven was unstoppable. Their merciless hatred for their creator and their former comrades spurred them on to great acts of depravity, and in the fortress citadel of Dudael they forged terrible weapons of war deep underground, or pitted mortals against each other, or monsters of their making, in great arenas for the demons to enjoy. The lands around this fortress became corrupted and as evil as its masters, with great fires and clouds of noxious gas threatening any who dared come close. In the citadels of the Silver Legion, the angels serving under Asmodeus constantly devised new and increasingly twisted experiments to conduct on their mortal charges. They twisted their minds and bodies beyond recognition, forced great changes upon them, and mingled their blood with animals and spirits to see what potential they could unlock. Nothing was too base or cruel for this legion not to consider, and Tabaet, the bastion of the Silver Legion, was an endless maze of towers and chimneys and laboratories where all manners of pains and pleasures were doled out. But heaven had not stood by idly as the war had raged. The Malhim were a new breed of angelic warriors created during the time of atrocities that were sent to fight the demons where the others had failed. They had no reservation nor regret over shedding blood of the fallen. Indeed, they seemed almost to revel in destroying them, and many of Lucifer's Elohim wondered what their true origin was, some speculating that they may have been particularly virtuous humans given new form upon their death to avenge themselves against the fallen, or that they had risen out of the flames of destroyed host strongholds, that desire for vengeance and retribution made manifest. In Gehinnom, Lucifer and his loyal archdukes of the Crimson and Iron Legions toiled to salvage what mortal lives they could from the cruelty of the others. They organized expeditions to bring them to their own citadel, yet even the Lightbringer himself could not stem the tide of violence, suffering, and sin committed by his allies. Should he force them to bend the knee? How then would he be any better than the Creator whom they had rebelled against? But finally he could remain idle no more, and so chose to act against Abaddon, Azrael, and Asmodeus, even as the host had been pushed back to Makanon, the only city that had not been taken by the legions. The Long March was an attempt made by the Crimson and Iron Legion to bring the others into the fold. Dudael, Tabaet, and Kazdea were all besieged, and the three rulers were all made to bend the knee in the end, their hearts filled with resentment at this humbling treatment. But before they could act, Lucifer revealed his plan. No longer would the war revolve around protecting humanity and shepherding them, but rather it would be to supplant the Creator and his host in heaven. They would make gods out of the mortals, whose faith and worship in turn would give the fallen all the power they would need. Once the war would be over, the humans would inherit the earth, and the legions would claim heaven as their own. This was the beginning of the time of Babel. Mankind had suffered greatly during the time of atrocities. The three legions of ebon, silver, and alabaster had done little to elevate the pinnacle of creation, and thus much of what had once been taught needed to be relearned. Lucifer and those loyal to him despaired at what had become of humanity, but swore that they would right these wrongs. This would become the grand experiment. And for this purpose, Lucifer sent 10 of his most trusted fallen to teach humanity not just the secrets of the earth, but of heaven too. And with this knowledge, mankind began to construct cities and monuments to rival those of the legions themselves. Civilizations flourished like never before, and like it never would again, and for a time, things were good. The 10 ordained with this task became known as the Watchers, and they would travel from city to city to teach the frail mortals the lore of heaven. Eventually they would compose this wisdom into books called the Canon of the Eye, but fortunately these books were lost during the chaos of the end of the war. These 10 Watchers were Giriel, Sharael, Bethamael, Marael, Gamael, Urshambi, Samael, Agriel, Shamshiel, and Penemuel, and much of what they taught humanity remains with them today, but diluted or wrongly interpreted. Still, it is often said that because of these 10 and the grand experiment, the end of things was begun. For during the Age of Babel, even the Malhim were pushed back for a while, but they were never truly destroyed. In fact, while the Garou did not exist at this time in history, in modern times their reaction to meeting any of the fallen is eerily similar to that of the Malhim. Some demons therefore theorize that these werewolves are related to their ancient foes, maybe even descendants of them. This, of course, would not be an impossibility, for as we will see, it would not be the first time angels mated with mortals. For some of Lucifer's followers grew jealous of humanity, fearing that they would soon surpass the angels who were their rightful masters. Humanity would breed and grow in numbers, while there were never new Elohim born. Thus, a plot was born to replace mankind. Several demons sired children with humans, and these abominations were named the Nephilim. They were wholly unnatural, creatures of great power and terrible visage, with potential far exceeding either of their parents' races. The Nephilim would come to dominate the cities of their birth quickly, aging rapidly to adulthood, and with a rare few exceptions turning tyrannical and cruel, unchallenged by any mortals. They would track down and slaughter the 10 Watchers as well, replacing them as mankind's teachers, and this was a sin that Lucifer could not forgive. He set his legions to hunt them down and slay them, and while he was most likely successful in this endeavor, the fallout of these conflicts ruined the grand experiment utterly. For in the absence of wise teachers to guide them, humanity collapsed upon itself due to the pressure of what had been taught to them. By laying bare the secrets of heaven, Lucifer's fallen had instead exposed minds too weak and too immature to knowledges that they could not handle. It shattered the children of Adam and Eve. They could no longer comprehend the Elohim for what they were, for they lost the knowledge of the first language, which they had spoken since creation. In its place were countless smaller languages, and humanity would divide itself and its faith to the point where the power their worship granted Lucifer's legions could no longer sustain them. And by trying to elevate their charges to godhood, the fallen had instead signed their own doom. Mankind chose to be ignorant when given the opportunity to become exalted. And even to this day, no fallen understand what went wrong. In this darkest hour, the hosts of heaven struck their decisive blow. The demoralized and disorganized legions of Crimson and Iron were beaten back to Genhinnom, where they fought for 40 days and 40 nights. Dudael, Tabaet, and Kazdea were also besieged and destroyed utterly, and as the gates of Genhinnom crashed down and Lucifer was bound in chains of fire, the Ophanim, the judges of the creators, sentenced the fallen not to destruction, but to an eternity of darkness. An eternity away from creation and the Creator, with only their own kind and their memories to haunt them. Many of the fallen accepted their fate stoically, casting themselves into the abyss, proud in their loyalty to the Lightbringer and his cause. Yet as they waited for their prince to join them, as the fallen were corralled into hell, they realized that Lucifer would not come. He, unlike his legions, was never cast down into hell. The 3 grandchildren of Cain wait patiently for the time of judgment to arise. Bambi Parsons, a leader with an unbreakable will, Procyon, who has been reborn as a god amongst Cain's angels, and Dugal, whose thirst for blood is matched only by his strength of will and purpose. Their childhood, the Methuselah, control our every move through their timeless jihad. They are Her Satanic Majesty Dani, whose mere presence chills the heart, Maximilian S. Hardcastle, a tutor and master of the jihad, Socrates Johnson, a masterful craftsman of stories, Lauren Eason, a trustworthy ally and friend, Alexander Canehurst, inquisitive explorer and steward of the Canehursts, and Snow, who oversees the progress of the council patiently from the shadows. On the council of the Primogen are seated Edward Reed, Ian Nichols, the Black Friar, Raven Fang, Brandon Hunter Hayden, the Autumn Alchemist, and Michelle Light, wise leaders and of good judgment. This week the council will wish to thank the Elder Non-God for your continued support. We deeply appreciate your wise counsel. We would also wish to welcome the Ancile Vex Light, whose service to the council has not gone unnoticed. Thank you for your support. Naturally, all our elders, Ancile, and neonates receive our gratitude from the bottoms of our hearts. Without your support, this would not be possible. And thank you for watching. And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and Hell followed with him.